Welcome to With Love Men, where we dig deep into what it truly means to be a man today. I'm Jake Fishbein.
And I'm Nick Papadopoulos, affectionately known as Coach Nick.
Together, we've led men's groups for a combined 25 years.
And we've also written a novel, a self-help inspirational novel, fictional men's group, and the impact of this work. And it's in the process of being published. Stay tuned. Should be out by late June of 2026.
Late June of 2026. And this podcast is in addition to our novel, The Men's Group, a novel of messy friendships, and the men's group that we run, the Arena Men's Group, a place where we have real conversations about vulnerability, courage, and connection. No masks, no pretending, just honest talk about being men.
Absolutely. So, with that in mind, please take a deep breath. Take it in, let it out. Step into the arena with Jake and myself, and let's get rocking and rolling.
Let's do it.
So, we're talking about men and, because it's always men and, this time it's men and sex. Can I say
Yes,
that
we
again?
are.
Men and sex,
Men
right?
and sex.
Got it. So I'm putting you on the hot seat first, my fine feathered friend. Um, let me just share a quick little story, okay? And then ask you for your reaction, right? So about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, I was running a different men's group, right? And I had a colleague who was running a women's group. And we decided to bring the two groups together for a powwow, a joint session. And some of the men and some of the women in their respective groups were married or dating, right? And so leading up to this joint session, the guys were super duper nervous. And a big part of what they were nervous about, Jake, was talking about sex, talking about physical intimacy. In fact, they were coaching each other around be respectful, don't talk about sex, keep it clean, don't swear. Fast forward to the joint session. Literally, I don't recall the first question we asked, but whatever question we asked, one of the women, got up to share. And I'll keep it clean because I know my kids, I think sometimes listen to this podcast. Uh, but I, I'll give a little flavor. She gets up and she goes, "Look, I really love to give a blowjob. Love it, love it, love it." And starts. This is the part I'll keep clean. Starts to describe how she gives a blowjob. Okay, and gets very graphic. And she's super duper grounded and comfortable, right? And and the women, they're all like nodding their head and like, a couple of jumping in, going, "Yeah, yeah, I'm the same way, whatever." And the guys are just like, you could like just their faces are all like, stunned, they're white. And I look at them and it just came out. You know how I am sometimes in group. I just looked at them and go, "You idiots." It just came out natural, right? My question to you is, what's your reaction to that? You've got this group of men who, leading up to the joint session, as I said, did not want to talk about sex, do not go near it. And the first thing that's talked about on the women's side, the women's group, is sex and it getting graphic. What's your reaction to that? Why is that? Why would something like that happen?
My first reaction is I'm not surprised. And it's
Were you in
so
the room?
interesting.
Were you in the
I
okay.
wasn't in that group yet. I didn't know you yet. So I probably would have done the same thing that all those guys were doing.
How come? How come?
I think I'll only speak from my own experience
Right.
that men definitely talk about sex with each other. They do. And it doesn't tend to be super graphic. It doesn't tend to be super detailed. It doesn't tend to be about this is what I like doing or this is what works for me. It does tend to be about bragging. It tends to be about establishing one's masculinity. And what I've noticed, especially in the work we've done with men over the last decade, is that as soon as we bring up sex, even in our groups, and for those of you listening, And sex doesn't come up that much. And I think it's for
Right.
this reason. A lot of our groups have men who are married.
Mm,
And for whatever reason, when men are married, the minute sex comes up, they take it as if we want to talk about their partners.
right.
And they say, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to disrespect my partner.
Right.
She wouldn't want me talking about this. And our point always is, we didn't ask about your partner.
Right.
We asked about you.
Right.
And so it seems like there's something in there, particularly among men who are married. Because I noticed maybe a difference in men who are younger and dating. Maybe that
Right.
conversation is very different if it's a group of 18-year-olds than it is a group of people in their 40s and 50s.
Fair.
Maybe it's different. Maybe there's a lot of conversation around sex. I remember when I went to college, we had these advisors called UCCs, upper class counselors. And the
Okay.
very first day I was sitting there with, I don't know, our group had 4 or 5 people, and it was co-ed, a mixture of men and women. I remember one of the women, I can still remember to this day, her very first question after the UCC went through, like, you got to go to your advisor here and your advisor there. She asked, so I hear Kenyans are really promiscuous school. Is that true? And literally the first question. And I think I sat there like having never had sex, like curious, but at the same time, like,
Right.
what the F?
Wait,
Like,
what am I missing here?
what am I missing here? But I feel like maybe that conversation is different at 18 years old with the hormones raging than it is for
Right.
people in committed relationships who are embarrassed or feel shame or have been conditioned not to reveal what they really feel about sex. And I think that's so much for men. The messages men get around sex are both like go after what you want and
Right.
also don't go after what you want. Be respectful, but also be aggressive, which are also the messages men are getting in our society today around masculinity, which can be so confusing.
Right.
And I think all of that contributes to a situation like that, where the men in the room are like, let's keep it clean,
Right.
let's not talk about what we really feel,
Right.
probably because they haven't been being honest up until that point. Which is
Mm,
maybe that's this is my long-winded way of getting to that point, which is maybe the women in that room were just far more comfortable being honest about their relationship to
yes.
sex than the men in the room were, which has been my experience in
Yes.
working with men.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say is that being honest with your partner, especially as you said in a married relationship, often men are not honest about a number of things.
Mhm.
Sex can be one of them.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Okay.
All right. Well, my first question for you is, going a little, well, let me see. I have a whole, as you know, I have a bevy of questions here, so I got might pick of
Oh
the
boy,
litter.
boy. We've got to end the podcast sometime
I
today, James.
know.
All right.
I know.
So
Well, this one we could be here for a very long time. It's filled with so much. What were the earliest messages you received about sex from society, from your friends, from your parents? Like, and how did those messages that you received when you were growing up, how did those messages shape you?
I would say I'm I'm trying to connect to the feeling I have when you ask that question. Um, and so what the feeling that's there, what's coming up for me is restrictive and off limits.
Mm,
Very very there's like a tightness around it. Um, you know, uh, we pick up our cues from especially when we talk a lot about a group about relating back to our 7-year-old version, right? Because often that's where um, we're highly influenced by our parents, by our teachers, by family members, right? Adults, right? It's also where some of the early major events happen in our lives, right? That, to your point, influence us. And so, for me, my parents were not very affectionate, right? I mean, they were nice to each other, but they were not physically affectionate. It wasn't like they were physically holding hands or physically kissing. Um, so I would say there was definitely more of a formality in sort of in an intimate relationship. That was my role model. I don't say that as a good or bad thing, but it did feel like it was very formal, very tight. Um, and I would say that on the flip side, which is interesting. I remember playing spin the bottle in fifth grade, and loving it, loving it. And there was a couple of girls in particular who, I don't know, it seemed like when I was in fifth grade, we seemed like we were 25 years old already. We just seemed, I mean, again, I'm speaking as a 10-year-old, right? Or going back to 10, 11 years old. But I do remember really, really enjoying it, right? Like playing spin the bottle. And my class did that quite a bit. And I always remember I always felt shame for liking it. I always
Mm.
felt shame, getting a boner, being in fifth or sixth grade, when a friend would sleep over and we would talk about the girls in our class, right? It always felt like taboo. And I don't know where that really came from, but that's how it felt for me. It felt very restrictive. And as I've shared in other podcast episodes, because we have a few, everybody out there with love men, but I've shared in other podcast episodes that, my real first sexual experience was really, uh, being violated by a perp, sexual abuse. And so, that really messed me up around sex and intimacy because ultimately I related to sex as you either dominate someone or you get dominated. And the net of that is it removes intimacy, connection, trust, safe space. And so I feel like the sexual abuse really added to this sort of formality, this, tabooness, very secretive. And I'll say one more thing. I mean, you asked, so um, um, I remember my dad, and again, I can't remember if I've shared this before in an episode, but I remember around that period, 10, 11, my dad found a Playboy magazine. Actually, my mom found it and went and told my dad, which again added to this whole experience. And I remember it was a Sunday morning, and we always went to church. My parents were very religious, and my father found a Playboy mag. My mom found the Playboy magazine, told my dad on a Sunday morning, and he literally came into my room and physically destroyed my room, like threw stuff around. I had this baseball game, cardboard baseball game, destroyed it, screaming, the devil is in our house. So the easy answer to your question, or the bottom line to your question, is by the age of 12, sex was fucked up. I mean, it was a shit show for me. And it's
Yeah.
been a lifelong struggle. It's been a lifelong topic that I've had to deal with, as far as changing and shifting my relationship to have it be healthy. So yeah, a lot there, a lot to unpack.
Yeah. Hold on. Give me one second. My microphone is malfunction. Oh, it's back.
Oh, it's back. Yeah, I hear you.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
back. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
I left you speechless. Is that what
you
happened?
left me speechless. You left me speechless. I mean, I'm present to so much in what you share every time I hear these stories, but what I'm really present to is I think so many people have similar like made stories they've made up or relationships to sex because of events like those growing up.
Mm,
Not necessarily the same ones, not to the same degree all the time, and sometimes even more. But those dual experiences of something's wrong with sex, sex is bad, I need to avoid it.
right.
And I like this, like I like the way this feels, and then feeling guilty and shame. I certainly had similar experiences of getting those messages. I mean, I remember my dad at least a few times sat me down at the beginning of high school each year and said, no sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I think the rock and roll part was okay, but the sex and the drugs part, no.
That's why I came third.
That's why it came third. And at the same time, I mean, as a teenage boy and as a teenager, there's so many hormones and so many desires. And I grew up in the era of chat rooms and the internet. So a lot of
Right.
my first experiences weren't even physical. They
Right.
were with random strangers online, which is a whole,
Yeah.
had a whole different level of insecurity and unsafety
Right.
involved. And I remember feeling guilty and bad about all of that. And at the same time, enjoying it.
And Jake, would you say you felt bad, using your word, right? Did you feel bad, during high school? Take that as an example, because your dad, for example, said, "Hey, no sex, drugs, and rock and roll." Um, like what's the mess? Like when you're sitting there with dad, right? And he says that, like, what's going through your body, right? Like, okay, dad seems to know stuff. He seems like a good guy. He says no sex, no drugs, no rock and roll. Like, what
You
was?
know,
Do you remember like how that landed on you?
I don't. I'm sitting with it now, and I can still remember like being in my room and like sitting in my desk here, my dad being on the bed and talking about it. And I think in those moments, it was just like, all right, these are the rules.
Got
Like,
it.
these are the rules. I
Right.
don't know if there was a lot attached to it, but definitely with the chat rooms, I knew that was wrong. And I don't
Mm,
think I knew that was wrong just because my parents said don't talk to strangers online, but because
hmm.
that was like there was a lot of conversation in those days about the dangers of talking to random strangers on the internet. And
Right.
so for me, the badness felt like it wasn't even connected so much to the sexual component of it. I mean, that was part of it, but it was like I know I'm doing something wrong that
Right.
is potentially dangerous,
Right.
and I keep doing it. Like I
Right.
still have this compulsion. I still keep doing it because the hormones and like this was my only. We weren't playing
Yeah.
spin the bottle, which would have been like way, way healthier if I was there playing spin the bottle and having
Right.
these experiences with girls that I knew versus
Right.
I don't even know if these people were girls on the internet. I hope they were, but I don't
Fair.
know.
Fair. Right. 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 Is with the chat rooms for you, the experience of the chat rooms, like why did it feel bad? Just to take a step back, right? I mean, yes, there's danger in, entering a chat room, especially as a young person, as a teenager. And at the same time, as a teenager, teenagers do a lot of things. They
Yes.
physically, metaphorically, literally, whatever, go into spaces that are not always safe. Yet I don't know if you or others, right? Like my kids are, teenagers, have that same experience that, yeah, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it was after I got caught doing it, I kept doing it in
Okay.
different
Okay.
ways. So that was definitely part of it is,
Right.
my parents found out when I was in
Right.
eighth grade. And that definitely was one of those experiences where I felt a lot of shame over what I had done
Mm,
and a lot of like I hadn't lived up to their expectations of who I
got it.
was. And over the next few years, I didn't go to chat rooms anymore, but like Facebook came out and there were
Right.
ways
Yes.
of talking with other people online. Like there were new ways of doing it. And so the core thing was I got caught. I got told it was unacceptable and
Right.
how devastated my parents were. Because by the way, it was on AOL, so AOL saved all of the chats. They could read everything that
Oh, wow.
it was. I mean, it was not a
Right.
great,
Not a great experience. Right.
not a great experience. And like to their point, like they didn't shame me for it. My dad, even I remember him saying, he said, if I grew up during this time, I probably would be doing the same thing.
Right. Hmm.
But I shamed myself. And in continuing to do it, it just like perpetuated the guilt of, okay, this is my access to sexuality because nobody wants to be physical with me. Which, I mean, there's so many narratives and stories
Right.
inside those early experiences, but then it impacted me for the next, I don't know, 15 years.
Right. Right. Yeah. Oh boy.
We only have another 20 minutes, so
Okay. All right. All right. All right. Your turn to put me on the hot seat.
All right, I got another question. Um, this is kind of building on what we're talking about because we both talked about shame around
Hmm.
sex. How does that shame impact men in their relationships, particularly as those relationships become more intense, more intimate, more committed? But even earlier when it's just the exploration of relationship.
Yeah. I mean, shame is a big deal. Shame is detrimental to, my health. If I'm answering the question, or anybody's well-being and wellness, right? So for me, the shame as I got older, the shame really, the shame really, it's like you're carrying a bunch of secrets around, and when I'm carrying a secret, it just consumes me, right? It literally takes up, the little brain that I have already, right? It's like it just overwhelms it. It takes over. So I'm actually not able to be present, right, in the moment with the person, or just, my surroundings in the world, right? Because I don't want to be found out. I don't want to be found out. And so that's a burden that I carried, right, around the shame I had, again, sexual abuse, with my teacher, scoutmaster, my parents' views of sex, like what I described, um, just feeling icky about it, right? And so the shame the shame was driving the bus, right? That was in the
Mm.
background. And so whatever's in the background, and in my case, especially as I was getting older, shame was front and center, running, driving the bus. Then my choices, my behaviors stemmed from that shame. Um, and I would say, even I remember the first time I had sex. I had sex when I was 16. For some reason, I still remember the date, August 5th. I don't know why. I still do. And I remember, the first three times that I tried to have sex, right? Something happened. And the something was, I just couldn't get hard. I couldn't, get the equipment working. And it was because a big part of it was the anxiety, the performance anxiety, that I had to perform. I had to look good. I had to be the big man on campus. I even lied to my then girlfriend that I had been experienced. I was experienced. I mean, I was 16. I had just turned 16. You know what I mean? It's not like, I don't know. I mean, that I had years and years and decades of life. It's like I'm 16. I mean, the equipment just started working a few years earlier, right? I mean, yet I had this shame about myself, that I wasn't enough. And it manifested itself around sex, right? And I do believe with boys turn men, or boys, young men, and then adult men, sex is a big place where we can find our value, if you will, our worth, or the quite the opposite. And in my case, I felt broken. I felt broken for a number of reasons, but certainly in the arena of sex and all that. So there I am, at 16, trying to have my first experience, which should be exciting and should be fun. Yet it was filled with shame, secrecy. I think I shared this with you before. Years later, in my late 20s, I bumped into this person, the
Mm.
person I had my first sexual experience. And she said, I can't remember, we were out somewhere. I bumped into her and she said, "Hey, great to see you. Hey, I got a question for you." "Yeah, sure. What?" She goes, "I was your first, right?" Now this is, I'm like 28, 29. So this is whatever, almost 15 years later. And I said, "What are you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?" And she said, "Come on." And I said, "Yeah, how'd you know?" She goes, "How could I not know?" She's like, "I just didn't have the heart to tell you that I knew." And it's just fascinating that I carried that burden, that weight,
Yeah.
And we always use the line from Brene Brown, which is shame lives and thrives and expands and strengthens in the dark. And yeah, for me, sex and shame have always been dancing together. So it has had an impact, especially early on.
Yeah. And really appreciate you sharing the depth of that and that first experience. And I imagine everybody knows if it's someone's first time
Hmm.
that it can't
Yeah.
not be obvious.
Yes.
Um, when you think about, what you've noticed in men's groups over the years, how do you see that shame impacting men in their relationships, especially when they're married, when they're with a committed partner? What's the impact when that shame is still driving the bus sexually?
I mean, I'll ride your coattails and go back to the very beginning of this conversation where you said, hey, if I have to bottom line it, it's about honesty. And so what I have found surprisingly, alarmingly, even shockingly, and many times, is that many of the men are not honest with their wives, with their partners. And I'm talking primarily right now heterosexual relationships. Um, and so and again, I can speak from personal experience, right, myself, and then certainly as a facilitator coach in these groups like you described. um, it just perpetuates the dishonesty and the disconnection. And what starts to happen is over time that separation, that disconnection just gets wider and wider and wider. And it's as if one person is living in one city and the other person is emotionally living in another city. There was, I always remember in one of the groups that I different than the groups we have today, but it was going back 12, 13 years ago, a different group, and somebody was talking about their addiction to porn,
Mm,
and also sharing how they don't have sex with their wife. Meanwhile, I remember him sharing how his family was in the kitchen making dinner one day, and he was upstairs. There was like an upstairs from their kitchen going up to an attic where he had his office. And while the kids and his wife were all making dinner, whatever, 15 steps below, he was up there masturbating, watching porn, right? And that may seem like an extreme case, and it certainly is extreme. To go back to your question, I really do believe that exists a whole lot more
mm,
in relationships. Even if it's not that drastic, there's this disconnection and a lack of conversation. So obviously, the more we're committed to being dishonest, the more that we're committed to having a secret or hiding all of this, um, it creates even more and more disconnection with your partner. Um, and it gives you, me or you the experience of being alone in the world, which again,
uh,
very much perpetuates the story men have, which is I've got to do it alone. I can't share, you know, I've got to go out and conquer the world on my own, which again, that just adds whole nother level of unhealthiness.
mm.
So let me ask you this about, you asked me about our men's group sessions. And again, it may be a similar answer, and still it's worth asking the question. We talk about and we coach men around, we do a lot, when we have our sessions and we coach men and we put them on a hot seat. We'll talk about their relationship to money, their relationship to their health and well-being, their relationship to their kids, to their partner, to their boss, to the business, to their finances, right? And we'll have like a really deep conversation, right? And we'll, famously say, okay, now what? And then by when, right? Like, what are you going to do about it? And by when, right? With the accountability piece. Why is it that we as coaches, you as a coach, and the groups that you facilitate, sex is almost never that conversation?
Mm.
I mean, I've watched you in action. You're quite good. Talk about
Thank
money.
you.
Talk about career. Talk about your relationship with your mom or your dad, right? I mean, I don't know. Can I even count on one hand the number of times we've said, okay, go do this around your physical intimacy?
Yeah.
What is that, Jake? But what would you say?
That is such a great question. And I have two thoughts that come to mind right away. And then as you know, and as the listeners by now know, it'll get to somewhere much deeper at some point. The first thought as I was listening to you was it oftentimes feels like that's just a don't go there.
Okay.
Like, and that could be very much my own stuff.
Right.
That also could be just sensing what's in the room, which also could be habit. We're not in the habit of asking, okay, how does this show up in your relationship to sex?
Right.
And we asked about it. Like you said, we asked about everything else.
Everything.
We even talk about politics in our group now, which has
Yeah.
been no forever. And that's a
Right.
whole other conversation, but we've talked about it there. And yet sex is still one of those areas that when we bring it up, it feels like guys just don't like there's no engagement in that conversation,
Right.
which I think is part of it too. It's I when I talk to new clients, I always tell them I'm a very responsive coach, which means I'm gonna sense what they need and work with them where they are, which can have the effect of being overly sensitive
Right.
to the point of they don't want to talk about this, so I'm not gonna go there.
Right.
I think that's a really big part of it. The okay, let's just feels like a no-go zone.
Hmm.
The other part of it is the habit. And then a bigger part of it, let me see, I had the thought, let's see if I can get it back. Because I think those are both on the surface. I think there's something much
Hmm.
deeper of why we don't talk about sex, why we don't go there. And as I'm sitting with it now, I think about there are a number of men in our groups over the years who've shared about sexual abuse, who've
Hmm.
shared about, like you, having those first experiences being so traumatic. And what's interesting is we do go there. Like when
Yes.
someone brings that up, we will go there. We will hold
Yes.
the space for that. We will encourage them to go speak to a therapist.
That is correct. Yep.
When it comes to sex now, when it comes to exploring intimacy now, physically, for what we don't. And I personally, I think it's a huge miss and
Hmm.
definitely an opportunity for us because everybody's got shit with sexual intimacy
Right.
in one way or another. And I still remember when I was in the Dudes of Disruption men's group and you gave me homework to go get laid in 2 weeks. Um,
That still stands as a Hall of Fame homework assignment.
it was, and it was exactly what I needed. I had just gotten out of a 4-year relationship and my first very serious relationship. And I had this, I mean, this whole story around sex. And I remember getting that homework and thinking, I can't do this. Like, it took me
Did you
till I
do
was
the
21 to have sex for the first time. How am I going to get laid in 2 weeks?
did you have a few adjectives for me like that, Nick blankety
I
blank?
don't, I don't think so because I'm when I'm tasked with something, I get kind of laser focused
That's
on
fair.
for
Yes, you
for
do.
for right or wrong. I get
Yes, you
very
do.
laser focused. So it's like, well, I don't have a choice now. Which
That's true.
I think doesn't necessarily always work. In that situation, it did, and I was able to accomplish the homework in 5 days.
Hmm.
And it wasn't really about sex. It was about my relationship to it. And it started a whole journey of redefining my relationship to sex, which has been so valuable. And had you not been willing to go to that place, I'd
Right.
still be in that same place. So I'm sitting here like trying to get like even another level deeper, and I just keep coming to like I don't actually know
Hmm.
why, but I know that it is avoided, and I know
Yes.
that there is so much value. And maybe I'll say this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too on this before we begin wrapping. We've done this men and sex conversation in our group, I don't know, a handful of times, 5 times over the last 5 years, probably.
Right. Right.
Every time it's a shit show. Either someone complains about it, someone says they don't want to talk about their partner, we do a homework and the homeworks are mailed in.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I can think of two or three guys who really take it on, which is the
Yes.
case with all of our homeworks.
Yes.
But this conversation in particular, it just feels like it falls flat every time we have it. And
Yeah.
maybe I've just learned it's not worth having this because guys aren't willing to go there. And I mean, that's a cop out. That's not a good enough reason to explore
I
one of
hear
the
you.
fundamentally important parts of what it means to be a man is sexuality.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And and we should be proud of it, and and at the same time take it on. If
Hmm.
we're not proud of it for whatever it is, like whatever it is that we're dancing with, that's why my question to you, if someone said I'm in debt, you and I are not experts in finance, yet we're experts in having a conversation about it and getting to
Yes.
the root, of the dysfunction, or the root of, what's driving the bus and all that, right? If someone says, "Hey, I'm struggling with my weight," same thing. We're not
Hmm.
doctors, we're not, trained personal trainers, yet we can have that conversation, come out of it and say, "Okay, now what? And by when?" Right? And people can, it's really interesting, Jake. We say in group, when we tackle a particular area, it could be, again, using my two examples of weight or finances, and we say, "Hey, if you can have a breakthrough here, you can have a breakthrough in other places in your life." Or however you're
Hmm.
showing up here, let's call it finances or your weight, or something else. It's a metaphor for how you're showing up. Yet I don't know if we've ever said, and I know I'm being a bit extreme, but I don't know if I've ever said, "Hey, how you're showing up in the bedroom, you're showing up in other places." Maybe we have once, but or how about the opposite? How you're showing up with your finances is showing up in the bedroom. I
Yes.
can honestly say I've never said that.
Yeah, we've never said that.
I don't even think I
I
think that.
I don't. I actually I have a friend of mine. He's a men's coach out in California. And excuse me, in a lot of his marketing online, he talks about, bringing emotional intelligence from the boardroom to the bedroom. And he's
Mm,
very explicit. Like this is
mm-hmm,
about performance and presence
mm-hmm.
in your career and performance and presence in bed,
Yep.
recognizing that dudes care about both of that.
Yes.
And we talk about results a lot. We talk about, we run a men's group that is about creating different results. It's
Right.
about redefining your relationships. I mean, I always say we help men have better relationships.
Yes.
Interesting that that is what I believe we do.
Yes.
And we don't talk about the bedroom when we talk
Yes.
about working with men. And that probably is something for us to reflect on. I
Yeah,
certainly
absolutely.
will.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. It occurs to me, it occurs to me, like, the feeling I have right now is, we talk about above the iceberg and below the iceberg, and below the iceberg, right, which is where the juice is
Hmm.
on any topic, is super dense and wide. It's super, like, strong and thick, and you can't, you got to, like, spend days and weeks and years trying to, like, chip away, and it's dark down there and it goes really deep, right? That's what sex feels like. It feels like this big, like, massive undertaking. So, I, let's
Mm.
talk about something else. That's how it occurs to me. It's almost like, boy, that mountain is really big, man. Come on, there's some other mountains we could probably, that are important as well, which they are. And it is interesting, the disconnect. What I'm left with in our conversation is how sex is very much disconnected from the other parts of our lives, if that makes sense, right? Because we can
Does.
talk about everything else, like my relationship to my kids, my relationship to work, my relationship to health and wellness, career, finances, right? And we literally use the language: how you show up here, you're showing up there. You have a breakthrough here, there's a domino effect. Yet sex is always omitted. Um, and And so what I would say, I know we're starting to get to our closing remarks. One of the things, one of my recommendations or invitations is to be intentional about talking about sex.
Hmm.
Now, how you talk about it to whom, right? I mean, at the very least, the person that you're partnering with, right? I mean, at the very, very least, right? Like that person. Uh, Being intentional about making it normal. Again, I have
Hmm.
two sons, 16 and 12, and we recently we had a conversation where I was just sharing with them techniques. Just based on my own experience. Doesn't mean my experience is the right one, but what I shared was, hey, here's what's worked for me. Here's what seems to work. Again, I'm heterosexual, so I was sharing with them techniques or strategies that have worked with women. And I was committed to just being normal as if, look, we had a conversation the week before about money, about finances.
Hmm.
And I was really committed to just, let's just have a conversation, not be weird about it.
Yep.
And so that's my invitation to everyone, which is normalize the conversation of sex, the physical part, the emotional part of it. Just normalize it. Like bring it to the service. Have some fun with it. Even poke at it. We always talk about when we have a disempowering thought or conversation. One of the ways to loosen the grip is to poke fun at it in a responsible way, but poke fun at it. So that's my parting shot.
Yeah, I love that one. And I think I'm committed to, in our group, in the arena, bringing sex up more and poking fun at it and not making it weird, not having it
Yes.
had this heavy cloud over it, but just recognizing it's a fundamental part of our lives.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. My parting shot, I probably have two. The first one, I'm just left with these two thoughts that I'm a bit of a philosopher, so I always think really big picture. And I think sex has two really big components. One, it's the ultimate vulnerability of being witnessed and seen.
Mm,
And even talking about it, like this has felt very vulnerable. And everything I've said here, I've said to you before. Like I didn't reveal anything
right.
I hadn't shared before, and it
Right.
feels very vulnerable. And then the act of sex is, especially if you're really present to it and connected, like you're just seen. And
Right.
that makes people really, really uncomfortable because being seen comes along with, am I going to be loved? Am I going to be accepted?
Yeah.
Am I going to be supported? Is someone going to laugh at me?
Yeah.
And so there's that component of sex equals being seen, like truly
Yes.
connected sex. The other part about sex, and this is what I don't have my whole handle on, and then I'll have my real parting shot, is sex connects us with creation.
Mm,
And I remember
mm.
doing a webinar a couple years, 2, 3 years ago with a good friend of ours, Victoria Grimman, who's a phenomenal therapist who we referred many clients to.
Yes.
And she and I were talking about fatherhood. And ironically, neither of us were parents, but we were talking about
Mm.
fatherhood. And I had this recognition that when we have parents, we literally know our creators. Like
Mhm.
not God up in the heavens, if you believe in that, not the life force of the universe. Literally, our parents are our creators.
Are you saying my mom had sex? My
Yes,
95-year-old sweet little mama?
I'm saying that. I'm saying that. And I have a hunch there's something in there that makes us really uncomfortable.
Mm,
Connecting
mhm.
with creation itself, connecting with the fact that we were created through sex. I know there's IVF and other ways now, but
Yeah. Yeah.
still fundamentally. And the
Yeah.
fact that like sex connects us with creation and with our
Mm,
parents. And so there's something in that soup that I don't have the full connection to, but I just remember that moment of when we have parents, we know our creators,
yeah.
which that is not how we think about our parents. But
That's true.
it is, I think about it from time to time, and it is a really powerful place to sit with. No, these two people created me
Right. Right. By that act, right? Of
by
the physical act.
by that physical
of
act
being together physically. Yeah,
of
that's
being together.
interesting.
There's
Yep.
there's so much more there. I wish we had more time to keep exploring that. For the moment, what I will share as my final parting shot is if you are still holding shame around sex,
Mm,
if, and that's all of us to some degree, even when we've done work on it, if sex is still occurring as something you have to perform in, as something where you have to look good, as something where you have to prove yourself, and I say that to both the men, women listening, but also the women, that give yourself the gift and do whatever you need to do, whatever work is necessary to let go of that as much as you can.
yep.
Because sex can be such a wonderful, connective, powerful, fun, funny, pleasurable, joyous experience.
Right.
And I've only experienced that because I did enough work to let go of the shame. And by the way, it still comes up from time to time.
Yeah.
It's not
Yep.
it's not gone. And there are still
Right.
experiences that come up. And I'm right back to feeling like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. Um,
Right.
and on balance, doing the work has led to a radically different experience that I'm very grateful for. So that would be my offer to everybody listening is whatever that
Awesome.
means. Joining a men's group, joining a women's group, being in therapy, doing a plant medicine retreat. I don't know, going to a rooftop and a mountaintop and taking off all your clothes and communing with the sky gods. I don't know. Like whatever you need to do, go
All
do
of the
it.
above.
All the above.
Love it. Awesome, Jake. Well, thanks everybody for listening. This has been With Love, Nick.
With love, Jake. We'll see you next time.
Yep.